Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. This is a really amazing episode. It's with Azul Terrones, and he has this amazing story, and he talks about not being very good at school, wanting to write, not being very good at reading and writing, and his teachers really discouraged him from writing. He flunked freshman English in UCLA. He wanted to major in drama because he was very good at acting, and he figured in order to be successful, he just needed to figure out how to best play a role. As our conversation unfolds, Azul suspects that he's a highly sensitive person, and he's been incredibly successful. You'll hear in his bio all of his accomplishments. And as he names what he's done to be successful, these are all traits of being a highly sensitive person. So I think you're really going to enjoy this episode. And he just has such an amazing amount of vulnerability and authenticity. I heard him speak at Podcast Movement and was just touched by his story. I rarely go and talk to speakers, but I just felt compelled, and I got this hit that I thought he was a highly sensitive person. And I talk about this in the episode, so I really don't want to say too much about it. There's some beautiful quotes in here. He talks about influence comes from service. I can show up and serve. He talks about how building relationships is about connections, service, listening. He was a really hard worker at school, but he says he wasn't really academically smart. He struggled with reading and writing. He learned to memorize books, and he didn't do well on standardized tests. And he has just created this very successful life based on what his strengths were, and he is incredibly resilient. I don't want to say too much, but it was just a joy talking with him. And what I love is we talk about in this episode the specific strategies that he used in his strengths and how this relates to each and every one of you listening, and how you can take what he's done and apply it in your own life. So let me tell you a little bit about Azul. Azul Terrones has been called a book whisperer. He helps leaders write and publish books that people love so they can create their brand, grow their audience, and increase their influence. His signature coaching program is built around the idea that creating books is about building the conversation that you want to own. Azul is the CEO of Authors Who Lead and the host of the top writing podcast, Born to Write. His TEDx talk, What Makes a Good Teacher Great, has been viewed over 1.6 million times. Azul's clients have included Wall Street bestseller Pat Flynn from the Smart Passive Income podcast, Jada Selner, co-founder Simple Green Smoothies, and Dana Malstaff, the founder of Boss Mom. He lives in San Juan, Puerto Rico. I think you're just going to love this. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can really help me out by sharing the podcast with other people. If you're comfortable posting on social media, that would be great. No pressure. And now, on to the show. Hey, Azul, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm really excited to have this conversation today. I heard you talk at Podcast Movement this summer in Florida, and the story that you told just totally touched my heart. I normally don't have a sense about whether people are highly sensitive or not, but I came up to you after, and I usually don't do that either, and we talked for a minute. So let me just ask you, this is a question I ask all of my guests. Do you identify as being highly sensitive?
I wouldn't say I do. It's not something I've actually was familiar with at all. So I would have to say no from the onset.
Do you know anything about the trait at all?
No, I don't.
So because my guess is that you're probably thinking highly sensitive means emotional and fragile, and that would be my guess. Is that correct?
I don't have an opinion about it because I have no idea what it means, to be honest, besides.
Okay. So just briefly, there are 4 core characteristics. This is Dr. Elaine Aron's work. And so it spells out the acronym DOES or DOES. So D is depth of processing. We're really deep thinkers. We have a pretty active prefrontal lobe. We have an active insula. So we're really good at troubleshooting, forecasting. we can run a little bit on the anxious side, but we're also very conscientious about what we do. We sometimes have that observing part of us that kind of sees what we're doing and can moderate. The O is for over-arousal and overstimulation, that because we take in way more information and details that other people do, we notice details, temperature, sounds, subtleties, facial expressions. We tend to kind of get filled up pretty quickly, kind of like a sponge once it absorbs too much water and there's nothing else. Mm-hmm. The E is for empathy and emotional responsiveness, that we tend to have very high levels of empathy. We have strong emotional responses to things. Often we don't like being startled. We don't like watching people get hurt. The news can be disruptive to us. We have a very strong sense of social justice, of what feels fair and equitable. And the S is sensitive to subtleties, and that can be changes in barometric pressure, temperature, hearing the sound of a clock, scratchy clothing. Again, it goes back to that noticing subtle details. I mean, I'm not going to make the distinction of whether you are or not, but does any of that resonate for you?
Yeah, a lot of it does. A lot of it actually, more than we talked about. It's like, how are you describing my son to a T?
Yeah. Which is, like I said, I really don't have my radar on when I meet people or talk with them, but just the way that you shared your story and how impacted and touched I felt, I really got that sense that I saw some traits that, you may or may not be. If you or any of the listeners are new to the podcast, you can go to hsperson.com and there's a self-test that you can take. If you take it and you think you're highly sensitive and you're not sure, you can go to the child's version of the test and take it and think back to when you were a kid, because our culture doesn't really value sensitivity. Many of us have learned to bury that trait. So just an FYI.
Perfect. I love that.
Yeah. What I would love is to have you share the story that you shared at Podcast Movement, just because I really was touched by it. Are you comfortable with that?
Well, I think it would depend. Of course, I'm comfortable sharing it, but I wanted to make sure everyone hears different things. When they come up to me, they say, oh, I really love the story about this. And someone else will come up and say, I love the story about this. And so what you heard might be different than what other people heard. So I'd love to know what you're speaking of so I can actually connect with that. And of course, I'm happy to share whatever you thought was impactful.
Well, here's the interesting thing. The filter that I heard was, I love the sense of empathy and insight and caring that came out of your story. Now, I know you're wanting me to tell you what hard facts you told. And you did talk about some of your struggles in school and then joining Pat Flynn's course and writing a book and how you created something pretty special with Pat Flynn's course. I don't want to give too much of the information away. Does that give you enough information to go on?
Yeah, that helps.
Yeah.
That's a lot. Yeah. So I think the best way to start is just talk about where I began. So I had always wanted to be a writer, thinking that telling stories meant being a writer. And then hearing from my English teachers as a kid that, no, you have to actually write well to be a writer. You can't just be good at stories. That's not how it works. So just really being discouraged, but always wanting to write stories or tell stories and create really a life around that. But was super discouraged, kept it in my heart, but didn't really do well in school. I guess I did well in the sense that I got to UCLA. To me, I guess it's a pretty big accomplishment, being the first kid in my family to go to college. But even there, flunking freshman English, wanting so bad to be good at this, but not having to take it over again. And the thing that really struck me was through all of that, I continued to pursue different things that were interesting to me, but I ended up becoming an English teacher, which is ironic because I'd never graduated with a degree in English or even a degree in teaching, to be honest. So my background was still focused on this idea of people have stories within them, and I can see those things. Words are really hard. Seeing words and how they work still trouble me, but I can see story really well. Fast forward, being a teacher, I always still had this dream to be a writer, but I just didn't have it, like the access to me as far as like what would it take, because 25 years ago, becoming an author was a gateway sort of career. Like if you didn't have an access to a publisher or something like that, you're just not going to be able to write a book. You have to be, quote, good enough. And I just didn't believe that. So I started helping kids publish their work, because if kids could publish a work, meaning by 13 or 14, if you had a published book by the time you graduated 8th grade, then this idea of being an author would be already accomplished. It would be so powerful to have these kids. And that was what I did. So I started learning to teach them. And yet for me, I was still not sharing the story until a student came to me and said, hey, Mr. Toronis, where's your book? And unfortunately, I just don't have it in me to lie to them. So I said, I don't have one. They're like, well, why? And the truth was I was just still afraid, the same afraid I felt when I was a kid. So that's when I decided I need to start doing something about this, stop talking about it and do something. But I just didn't know why I was doing it. Being published is one thing. Being an author, making a living at it, or making a life goal was something huge. So I saw that Pat Flynn and his buddy Chris Ducker were holding this one-day business breakthrough. And I had been a principal. I had been a university instructor. I have, adjunct faculty for a graduate school of education. So I was familiar with what hard work was. But this one-day business breakthrough was signing up, and then you can work through your business, get your business growing and get it on track. And I thought, what a great opportunity to really work through something I want to do. It's just, how do I make a living outside of teaching? Is it possible for me? Seems like a lot of people were doing it. If you look at the internet, it seemed like everybody was able to, but I just couldn't figure it out. But with that, I found out that you actually, they sent an email, welcome to this day. Here's what you expect. Send your website, your business model, how many clients you have, how does the business grow? And I had nothing. I didn't even have an idea. So it wasn't like I could put something like, I think this is what I want to do. I didn't even have an idea. So I did have this planted seed in my heart about writing a book. And I had read lots of books, taken courses, and I just had never taken action. So in the 30 days before going to Pat Flynn's event, I wrote the book, Art of Apprenticeship, which was my goal, was to find a mentor that would help me find my way into this online business. Because I knew if I was going to learn, it had to be learned with another person. I couldn't just do it from a course. I wrote the book and sent it to the editor the day before the event. And the powerful thing that happened was that showing up with just the idea of why I thought I was there, and that writing a book and doing it in 30 days was the thing that sparked interest in most people. So that's really where this writing and idea of writing and coaching started, because I figured I needed to show up and just be myself, even if I didn't have an idea. And that's all I had. So it had to be enough. And so that's really that beginning entry point to becoming an author, and really the beginning of something that I made my living in, which is being a coach and helping leaders write books that people love. That was a huge shift. And that was really a great deal of the way in which my life outside of the school started to form. So that's the first part. Like, that part is really, that got me open to the idea that maybe I could do this. I don't know that I was ever the greatest teacher, maybe a good teacher, but not a great teacher, partially because I knew in my heart that I wasn't supposed to be there. But 24 years later, when you're a principal and a teacher for 24 years, you it's really hard to let go, because your identity is built around these things. So that was the shift. That's where the first beginning of the shift started to happen for me, and connecting with the way I saw the world. And the thing that I think most people at that podcast movement were there for is that I think so many people were trying to chase the dreams and things they see other people doing. And the name of that talk was Beyond Downloads, because I think people misunderstand what it's like to be influential or have influence. And the thing that I noticed that influence comes from service, and so many people want to have influence but don't want to serve. And that's the attitude I went into with the relationship. Going to this event was, how do I serve? How do I show up and be someone who's here to serve, not to take? Because that I can do. That if all the things I can do, I can show up and serve. You can't be wrong when you serve. It's a humbling, right? It's a humbling thing. You can go to do whatever is needed. And I think that's the journey that, people start to pay attention to, because I think it's less common than people think to be of service.
And could you talk a little bit about how you showed up to do service? Because that was another part of the story that, once you talk about it, I have a comment about it, but it was very pivotal for me to hear through your story how that shows up for me. It looks a little bit different, but I had a really big aha moment when you talked about that. So can you share about that?
Yeah. So because I don't have a lot, I lived in San Diego, which was fortunate where the event was, but a lot of people were flying in from different parts of the world. Actually, it was only 20 people, but I looked for, any details around, is there an event the night before? Because some people are flying in, from far away, and it's a one-day thing. So I reached out to both Pat and Chris, said, look, I noticed that there's no event. Is there one that I just missed? And if not, would you mind if I organize one so that people can come and get to know each other and connect if they're flying in early? And he's like, yeah, that's great. I said, I'll take care of the location. I'll let people know where it is, and I'll make sure there's enough room for everyone. He's like, great. Should I come? Should I pay for it? And I said, no, actually, Pat, you can't come, and there's no need to pay for it. Everyone's going to go on their own. And he's like, what do you mean I shouldn't go? I said, well, if you go, then no one's going to talk to each other. And that's the point. Like, they should connect with each other so they feel more at ease when they show up at the event the next day. He's like, oh, that makes sense. Which was, I think, part of the act of service, which is to be bold and take a stand and say, no, this is not about you. This is about them. So that moment of like serving was serving in the highest power, because it would be to my advantage to have him there, right? For me to get extra time, but it wouldn't be advantageous to the people who were there. So by doing that, about half the participants came, or 8 or 9 people came. We got connected, and some of those are still my friends that I met from that event. Actually, almost every single one of them we're still in contact, which is incredible.
And how long ago was that?
5 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was really a bold move on my part, but it was also an act of service, because I realized that he couldn't think of everything, and he didn't. And they were grateful. So the result was, when I showed up the next day, everyone knew me. People who didn't know me were introduced by the people that did. In fact, they knew me better than they knew Pat and Chris. So it was sort of an amazing leap, because I went from not knowing anyone or even having an idea of what I was going to do to meeting all these wonderful, very successful business leaders. They were already successful. I didn't realize this, but most of them already had 6-figure businesses, and some 7, and they were looking to just grow and connect. So I was really honored that so many of these people were being successful and that I could be connected to them. So that was sort of like the thing that served. And then what was next is that they asked me to do it again when they had the event again, and invited me to organize a bigger event of 50 people. And they had me come as a guest of theirs to the event. So it really started the relationship that I'm able to have to this day with both Pat and Chris because of that act of service. And I think that's what really struck me about showing up, thinking ahead, thinking like anticipating what they're thinking or what they need or what the people that they serve need, which is really the bigger issue. What did the people they serve need? And so that's what I was kind of thinking about when I went there. And it made a big impact for me because it was the only thing I could give. I didn't have experience to give outside of teaching and education. So that was my opportunity.
And I just think that's such a beautiful story. And what came up for me is right before I launched my podcast, I created a small podcast group of people that were just getting ready to launch or had recently launched. And this is a group now a year later that I've formed some really great friendships, and we've been there for each other, not only with podcasting, but as things come up in our lives around it. And I really saw the parallel process. And if we're going to talk in terms of being highly sensitive, we are great at connecting with people. And like you said, anticipating people's needs, being able to be of service and showing up in a way that's really meaningful. For me, I didn't think about it in terms of service. But what I know is when I'm needing support and I have a narrative of like, I don't fit in, I don't belong, I am really good if you put me in a role which is service oriented. How can I connect people? What can I do? Which I'm not saying this was your process, but I'm using words that go on for me that may resonate for some of the listeners, because my guess is that many of us do this without realizing how powerful it is, the gifts and skills that we have, and the way that we connect lots of people.
Yeah. I think that it's probably played out multiple times. It just wasn't something that I thought was unusual, but I thought was needed. It wasn't that I had some big agenda that if I do this, then this will happen. But I am always very strategic and thoughtful about building relationships. How much can I encroach on their space or in their ability to connect with me, and how much is just going to be saved for another time because everyone wants their attention. So that's just being thoughtful about those connections. And I have really wonderful connections with people I probably don't necessarily had any reason to be, but the conversations we exchanged were similar to that. The service was listening and connecting with them about their work as opposed to being consumed with mine, which is easy to do, I think.
Right. And for the people that are entrepreneurs or in the business, we think about marketing. For many of us as highly sensitive people, it makes us cringe, especially the part of us that, even for me as a highly sensitive extrovert, I don't always feel extroverted, and I still get socially anxious. I get nervous. I have, like I said, this narrative of like, I don't have anything to say. But when we look about it in terms of, these are your words, building relationships, connections, being of service, listening, these are things that we excel at. And so being able to take it away from the marketing and networking to we're just getting to know people and we're really interested about what they have to offer. And that in itself creates connections that are far more significant than I'm just here to market.
Right. I think that's the benefit. Like, I don't know a lot about marketing, but I know a lot about people. So if I don't worry so much that they're different, then marketing is not a problem. But when I think of it as something that other people are doing and I don't want to be like them, it's really hard for me because I think, that doesn't look or feel right. But sometimes I see people marketing go, that feels exactly the way it should, which is an invitation to participate, connect, understand. I think for me, as somebody who has those kind of feelings about it, I have to think differently. I have to reprogram my brain in order for being of service to people through marketing, meaning that if they don't have my help, then they're going to go to somebody else who maybe is not as qualified to help them, and they may not be able to get their book out into the world, which means I've robbed them of an opportunity of having a really great coach who knows how to help people finish their book. So that's the way I have to look at it. Otherwise, I get lost in the idea that marketing is a thing.
Sure. I want to go back a little bit to some of the struggles that you had in school, because I think it's really important for people to understand how much you struggled and the things that you struggled with in order to move forward. And I'd love to then jump forward and talk about what you've done since you wrote that first book, because I think those two pieces are really important in your story.
Yeah. So school was hard. It was just hard. I was a really hard worker, and that's how I got through school. I just wasn't ever academically smart, meaning the things that they wanted to see me produce to show how smart I was really difficult. So if they would have asked me to do it, and I would beg teachers to let me do it differently, like if I didn't have to read or write, which is kind of ironic because school is all about reading and writing. They actually, there's very little speaking out loud. There's almost no listening on the part of anyone but the students. So it was really hard for me to show my skills. Like, I could listen, and I could show my attentiveness, but I couldn't really then use it because just speaking about what I had understood wasn't the value. It had to be a paper or a quiz. Yeah, I couldn't read in third grade. I still remember struggling to memorize the books so I could pass. So eventually you can memorize them, right? They're the same books over and over. So these primers back in elementary school, and eventually you could memorize them. And that's how I got through. And it still was difficult. Even as an adult, it's still really difficult to read. So anything that involved reading or writing were extremely hard. In fact, anything that involved like a standardized test was hard. So like in graduate school, when I finished UCLA, to get into graduate school, I only applied to one program, and it was at UCLA. And I told them, I'm going to apply, but I'm not taking the GRE. I'll take it, but you can't use the scores. I don't want my scores to be considered because I don't think it'll measure me adequately. I'd rather use my recommendations from professors or people that have known me or worked with me. They're like, that's fine. It just might put you at a disadvantage. I said, it's okay because it won't put me at an advantage if I take a test to show you how smart I am. That's how kind of I started dealing with it better as I got older. And as a teacher, I became really sensitive. This is where the sensitive part probably comes in to the way kids learn. So I would get any and all kids to perform well because I understood that they all learned very, very different. I think that's where I was able to blossom, and helping people get better at something and do it non-traditionally is how it was good. It never really felt right to be in the school system because I never learned that way. So I was like bucking the system even as a principal, but that's the reason I had great results too. So sort of like it was complicated, and I refused to get a degree in education. So like that always put me on the outskirts. They're like, well, you really should. And I said, that's why I won't, because you think I should. There's no reason I'm any smarter because I have a degree in a totally unrelated field. So I'm not going to get it. I'll get whatever credential you need me to get, but I'm not getting a degree in education. I don't think it matters. I always kind of pushed against things. So as time evolved, though, my confidence grew because I realized that I was more right than wrong, when before I was more wrong than right.
Yeah. And my guess is that what I heard you say initially, that you were a good enough teacher, but my guess is because of your high levels of empathy, because of your own struggles learning, you really looked at each of your students to figure out how can you bring out the best of them in learning and what modalities are going to be best for them. And my guess is, as an administrator and a principal, you also brought that compassion, that insight, that thinking outside the box, and not that this is how we do things. This is how they've always been done. So I have a sense that you made far more of an impact. And even though you say you were good enough, my guess is that you probably excelled. And you also have a TED Talk. Why don't you tell us about that, since I brought it up?
Yeah. So I thank you for that. You're probably right that I probably was better than that. But I think I always felt a little disadvantaged because there were teachers who loved it. And I was like, I just don't love the system of teaching. I like kids, but is that enough reason to stay here? The observation that I made over the years was early on in my teaching career, a master teacher that I was observing started asking these kids this question, what's a good teacher? And eventually I started asking, well, what makes a good teacher great? Because there's got to be a difference between a good teacher and a great teacher. And so I collected 26,000 responses to that question and did it for 24 years in schools in inner city LA and suburban Texas and elite schools abroad. And I learned a great deal about what kids say and think about what makes a good teacher great. And that's the topic of the TED Talk. The truth is I spent a lot of years just not listening. As much as I wanted to say I was listening, and most teachers, if you ask them to say they're a good listener, from the data that I've heard, it's not true. We're hearing kids, but we're not listening, meaning we don't do much with what they tell us. We don't take action on them because we don't trust them. And a lot of that is hard for teachers to hear, especially myself, because it's like, no, I listen. I'm a good listener, but I didn't have a lot of evidence. So the TED Talk really just talks about what is the biggest learnings from the 26,000 quotes or comments that I recorded, and what insights did I take away from that. And that's really been reflective for me as a person outside of education at the moment to just see that in a new light.
Yep. And if you're interested, I have a link in the show notes. If you go to unapologeticallysensitive.com, click on the podcast page, and then on Azul's episode, there's a link to all of Azul's social media and where you can reach him. But I also link to his TEDx talk. So if you're curious to know what those things are, there it is.
When you first talked to me about this notion of being highly sensitive, I think I really disregarded it, not because of the way you said it or anything, but because of the notion you mentioned in the beginning, which is some people have a notion about being highly sensitive, being negative. And I think as a male, that's even more a stronger negative trait. A lot of women will say, oh, I want a sensitive man in the traditional sense, not in the notion you shared earlier. But then on the outside, it's not what society or even what women expect. They want something different. So like it comes with its own kind of emotional connection. And one of those things is when I came out pretty late in life at 38 as gay. So like that was always something that pushed a button to be sensitive, was to not be a man or not be seen as complete. So it was easier to hide sensitivity when in fact, the only thing I often don't do anything unless it moves me emotionally. It doesn't matter that it makes sense financially or makes sense to do something. If I'm not emotionally connected, I don't do it. And the times that I've betrayed those times is when I really have had not as good luck or success. So I feel like I really want to encourage anybody who is thinking that they're sensitive and trying not to make a connection. The truth is, the reason I am successful is that I can help people connect with that part of them because I hold the space for them to be as sensitive as they need to, even if they don't relate to it. I would say out of the initial calls I have with people, like the first call, out of 10, 6 to 7 will cry. And men or women, it doesn't matter. And it's not that we're talking about emotional things. It's just that it's so infrequent that someone says you can be yourself, whoever that is. And I'm here to hold that space so you can kind of find what it is you're trying to say without judgment. And so I think a lot of that, it comes from my ability to understand how hard it is for people to be in that space alone or with other people.
Absolutely. I want to drop in with a couple of things. So I want to go to Dr. Elaine Aron's research. What her research says, this was done back in the 90s, and she says that for highly sensitive people, 50% are men, 50% are women. We don't have any studies on how that impacts people that are transgender, non-binary. So I want to be very sensitive when we talk about this. I just don't have research on that. But I've often wondered, well, there were two things when we were talking. I really got this sense when I heard you talk, just because of the empathy, your story, the way that you talked about your experience. When I listened to you at Podcast Movement, I just got this hit, like, I really think you're highly sensitive. So what became really curious to me was, how were your traits viewed in your family? And was there a part of your sensitivity that you kind of went underground with? Because what the research shows is those people that have parents that are attuned to them, that don't have difficult childhoods, have very good outcomes. And it's those kids that have difficult childhoods have higher rates of anxiety and depression. So it made me really curious because I don't know you, but my experience is you seem to be pretty well adjusted. You embrace who you are. Obviously, your ability to be empathic and sensitive is what attracts people to you that come to work with you. So at some point you learn to embrace that. So what did that look like in your family?
Well, I'm the oldest, so I always had, the first out the door, first to college. I think for a long time it was just me and my mom, so it was a little different. But because she was always let me be who I wanted to be, if I wanted to do things that pleased me, she would let me. I've always felt supported in that way. I never felt like that I couldn't be myself and my family. So I think that was just something really special. But as time went on, it's just a lot more difficult to be in charge of a school of 1,400 kids and 100 employees to just be bombarded emotionally or by the way in which you have to discipline. Because as a principal, you don't work with kids, you work with adults. That's not your job. Is no longer to nurture kids. A lot of principals want to, but that's really not your job. Your job is to take care of the teachers and manage them, and their job is to take care of kids. So it's a huge shift, right? So part of it was, this is dealing with adults doesn't have the same level of empathy in the way that it works, like on the outside with parents and with complaints. And that's a lot of what you're doing. So that might have been why I didn't really love being a principal, because there's no way around some of these hard things when you're having a child arrested, or you're firing a teacher, or you're sitting on an expulsion hearing. These things those are taxing to somebody who's highly sensitive. It's really emotionally draining, and you feel it's like, I can't turn this off. It's driving me insane, and I can't do this work. As good as I am, I don't think it's good for me to continue to do this work. So being good at it wasn't the thing that was good. Being teacher, being sensitive is not only permissible, it's useful. And as a principal, it's you've got to turn it off, otherwise you won't be able to function. You can use it when it's appropriate, but it's more muted there than any other place that I've worked, because you have to produce a certain results in a certain way to be measured, So I think that was one area. But as a young person, I didn't really fit in, but I was in Boy Scouts. I was an Eagle Scout. I didn't fit in, but I was on the football team and marched in band. And I did all these things that sometimes didn't feel comfortable, but I always took risks and tried things, even if I didn't do well at them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like the fact that your mom really allowed you to be whoever you were, and you did not get any of those messages about, and I don't know what they would be, but what people tell me is, you're being too sensitive, you need to get thicker skin, you're too dramatic, you're too needy, you talk too much, you're too intense, any of those things. And it really sounds like you had that full acceptance of how you showed up in the world. And so then the next step was, how do again, I'm imagining or projecting, how do I navigate having these sensitivities, being in a world that expects men to be tough and play sports and not be sensitive? And so you figured out how to navigate that. Can I get the truth from you? Like, this is what I'm imagining.
Yeah. Well, I learned to navigate it in the sense that you have to play a role for it to work. Mm-hmm. You can't just be that way all the time, because people won't accept you. They don't. So that if I could play the role that they were expecting, I could be successful. So that's why I applied to UCLA actually in theater, because I thought, if I'm better at this acting thing, then I'll be better at life, because acting is what I'm doing most of the time around people, because it's what makes you successful. So I applied to, they're like, you kind of need some experience in acting. And I had never even taken an acting class. Here I am applying to university. I was like, well, what's the point of university if I have to know the stuff to get in? So, acting was one way I started to be able to do this work, because I was like, it's just a caricature. It doesn't have to be me. It's just the person I play on TV kind of thing. So I was able to be very strong because it was just a persona. Mm-hmm. But then what it started to do is isolate you, and the people that know you, they think this is who you are. So you have to find a balance. So I always felt supported. I always felt like I could be myself, but I also felt a little distant, because being emotional in some regards or sensitive in another, and then having a job that you're not supposed to be any of those things, makes it difficult to show up every day and love it. So that's why what people got confused when I left the classroom and became a principal, because I have a bigger mission. But then I would leave the principalship back in the classroom, and people were like, I don't understand, because I was up for superintendent. They're like, why would you do that to your career? I go, because I don't care enough about the career. I only care about me liking what I'm doing and enjoying the work I'm doing, because otherwise it doesn't seem very valuable. That was a little bit of the struggle. But as a young person, it was a useful tool to be able to switch back and forth.
Yeah, definitely. I'm really fascinated by the sense of resilience that you have, because I was imagining you saying, I went into acting so that I could learn how to kind of fake it to get through life. And what I heard you say is, I went into acting so I could learn to be successful, which is very empowering. That all the things that I hear you talking about are really about having more resilience and more ways to move forward in life using the skills that you wanted. Is that accurate?
Right. And I learned early on that these skills that I had already, they were within me, as this person who's very observant, very sensitive, could make more progress than the people that other people were being. So they were being bold and taking risks. But I was like, what if I just paid attention more and start to build relationships with people in the way that I know how, which is that sensitive nature. Like I know how to build relationships long-term with people. And that's how I ended up getting almost all of my jobs, how I ended up, I would interview really well for things I had zero experience for and get the job. And I was always baffled, like, how did this just happen? Just like on the stage at Podcast Movement, it was for beginners and for marketing. And the response after the talk was just, people were just moved and inspired. And I was like, I didn't think that's what I was doing. I thought I was talking about marketing and talking about why my worldview is this way about, not trying to chase downloads, but really what it did was impact people in a different way. And I think that's the skill that comes with being sensitive to the way the world works. When I'm on a stage, I'm still able to do that I'm able to do in person, that's newer, because before I used to mute that and try to be a persona, but now I can be myself on the stage, and that it impacts people, lots of people, not just one-on-one when I'm in a small setting. So that's the thing I'm trying to learn more now. It's like, how do I emulate that spirit that I have when I'm on the stage or in a group, and not somehow slip into something I'm not.
Well, and my guess is, and correct me if I'm wrong, my guess is that it started because your mom really allowed you to be who you were. So the message that you got is, how I show up in the world for the people that matter, I'm okay. And then you figured out these roles and how to navigate through what society expects from you. But it's the fact that you were able to notice and that you were able to go, like, if I can really watch people and observe, then I can use this to my advantage and I can make relationships. And with your public speaking, that somebody could get on stage and give the information that you give without the vulnerability and the empathy. And when you asked, what did you talk about? I'm like, I don't know. I was just really drawn to your empathy. Like, that's what came through to me. And that's where the connection was. So that because as a highly sensitive person, that's what I respond to more than anything else. You have the ability to give concrete information and that vulnerability and sense of connection. That's what people want. They want to have that sense of, like, oh yeah, I've had hard times too. You had hard times. You got through this. That is, I think, what probably was so compelling for me about hearing you speak. What are your thoughts?
I think you're right. I think most people are drowning in content, and we don't need more content. We're not there because we don't know. We're there because we don't think anyone understands us, or that we can do what people are saying we should do. And my whole point was, you're enough exactly as you are. Be your unique self and just do that more, and you'll be more successful than you can imagine. This is not about how many people like, click, or download your podcasts. That's the talk. But what it's really about, your uniqueness is far more valuable. And I was trying to inspire people to see that, like, I'm not the one that should be on the stage talking about these things. I shouldn't be a book coach. I shouldn't be those are because I don't have the qualifications of those things. But because I'm my uniqueness, I really have found the superpower, and everyone has it. And that's what I've discovered, is if people just stopped worrying about the things that they're not and focus on all these amazing things they are, even if they are weaknesses. I know that it changed my classroom when I stopped trying to hide I couldn't spell and just told them. I put a box on the board and put a check mark and said, I want everyone to see this. It's like the first day of class. I go, this is my spell check. And it just means that everything I put on this board won't be spelled correctly. And unlike the computer, there's not going to be a squiggly line, but it's just wrong. And you'll notice. So feel free to correct me, but I'm dyslexic and I can't read very well. And I'm super smart. I have a graduate degree from UCLA and I'm been lots of roles, but this thing isn't easy for me. So if I do that, just know that it's not about my ability to be smart. It's my ability to put words in the right order or read them right. And they really respected that. And some kids loved correcting me when I didn't mind because I gave them permission. But other kids would come up to me. One in particular, he was in my 7th grade class. He came up to me on graduation and said, I want to tell you something. I said, yeah, sure. Tell me. He's like, when you said that you were dyslexic, I just felt like the world was lifted off my shoulders because I felt so alone because I can't spell and I'm dyslexic. And I always felt like it was a disability that I had to be, make up for it. He goes, I wrote about the day that you told me there was okay to be me. You just were saying it was okay to be you. And I applied to the college. I never thought I'd even go to college. And I got into my college of choice. And that was what my paper was about. I just wanted to let you know that really changed me. So that's those things when we put ourselves out there, we can really make a difference if we just see our uniqueness. And I think that's what people were probably seeing. Like, yeah, I'm here because of other reasons, not because I'm the best writer in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's nothing new that hasn't been said, but what makes everything new and unique is what we personally bring to things. And that is what people are going to be attracted to. I want to go back to a little bit of what you just shared that, my tagline is sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. And I really believe that all of our perceived weaknesses are really our superpowers. What you did in that classroom is saying, hey, this is how I show up in the world. I've got some great strengths. This is something that I struggle with. So here's how we're going to work around it. And how this relates to each and every one of the listeners that everybody has a handful of things. Think about those things right now that you feel like are wrong with you or you hide from the world, or if anybody saw them, it wouldn't be okay. And think about if Azul had gone into this situation and tried to hide it from his class, they would have picked up on that tension. They would have felt like there's something weird. This guy's uptight around this stuff. He took this part of him where like, this is just something that's not a strength, put it out in the open, was okay with it. And he modeled to everybody else like, hey, we've got some things that work really great and some things that like may not be our best strengths. And there's no shame in that. I just think that's such a beautiful illustration of not only for that situation, but how that's relevant for every single person that's listening.
Yeah. I of course I hid those things because as a teacher, you're supposed to be the one who knows this stuff. And I was like, but it's not that I don't know it. That's the problem. It's just the way my brain works. So it just took, but the stigma of being the person that can't spell, even my graduate class, when I started teaching adults, they're even more, I know kids can be hard to each other, but your peers could be the first ones to judge you. And, so I let them know, I go, I don't want you to think that I'm not, I'll spell everything up here the best I can, but don't think it's wrong. If I'm not, feel free to correct it. Feel free to let me know. It doesn't offend me because I'm telling you now. It used to offend me when people correct my spelling because I just felt bad. But now I'm telling you it will be spelled wrong. There's no expectation that it should be right because I'm dyslexic. And it's like not like I'm trying to spell words wrong. I don't even notice half the time that I even did it. And sometimes I spell one word right, and the next time I spell it, it's wrong. And people are always like, how did you spell it right just a minute ago? And now it's wrong. I was like, I don't know. My brain just works that way. So I think a lot of that showing up and being okay with that's my vulnerable self, right? That part of me that feels like, oh, this is really hard for me. But it's also the thing that kept me from being a writer because of the way school conditioned me. I think, I was going back to find myself and give back what I got from some teachers who believed in me, even when my grades weren't great or my ability to perform in academia wasn't great. They saw me. And I think that's the thing I took away from school more than anything was school's sort of a game. But what it wasn't was it was life-changing if you let it be. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think doing the work I do with people is I don't think of it as any different than being a teacher. I just see people. I see them the way they are, how they show up. So that's why I'm able to see their stories because I'm not looking for what they think they're looking for. I'm looking for them. I really am grateful for that. Now looking back, out of all the ways I was teased, because you are teased if you're sensitive in some regards because you don't know why. As an adult, I have to walk out of a room when there's something on TV that's uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I have to leave. Like if they're making fun of somebody, or they're like that show used to be called Jack the Dude's Crazy. I can't handle any of that stuff because it just makes me feel uncomfortable. Same thing with horror movies, things like that. I just don't like to feel uncomfortable in those situations. So I avoid those things. But it took me a while to be okay with the fact to say, I don't like those things and I don't participate. And I don't watch news. I can't.
I don't either.
I don't do well. I just can't do it. So like, there's so many things that when you were talking about relate, I'm like, oh yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think your intuition, if I went and did some assessment, will probably be right in the money. It's interesting to know that I didn't get diagnosed to being dyslexic until I was almost done with college. So I didn't even know what the word meant, let alone that it was something that would describe me. So it wouldn't surprise me if the notion would be exactly what would describe the way I am.
Right. And what I would love for people to take from this is, just as Azul's talking about, school is not a system that supports people learning all different ways. It's about doing things a certain way. And highly sensitive people, it's estimated that we're 15 to 20% of the population. I'm hearing that it may be as high as 30%. So we're in the minority. And again, we can take this stance in the world that the culture doesn't understand us, our job doesn't understand us, our family, our partner, our education, our career doesn't understand us. We can take a very disempowered point of view, or like Azul is demonstrating, we can take our traits and really do the healing work that we need to, so that we really break the shame and we can say, this is what works for me. I'm good working for this amount of time. I can work in an open space, but this is what I need in order to be successful. I'm not saying that these are things that everybody can implement, but I hear so much disempowerment around the trait and feeling like how we show up in the world is not okay. And yes, there are systems that really don't honor our needs. Yes, we are a minority, and it's up to us to do our work, to do our healing, so that we can really embrace our traits and not have that negative response. If somebody says, you're so sensitive, you're picky, we go, yeah, what does that bring up for you? I really want to drive this point home because you've done such a beautiful job exemplifying what that looked like for you. And then I really would love to encourage people to take this out into their lives.
Yeah. You know what? The thing that I got from being a coach and a teacher and a principal that helped me was finding the language that helped people understand what was happening for me, to describe my experience, not to discredit theirs because they're having their own experience with what just happened, but I have a certain one and it looks and feels totally different than yours. And so that was one huge shift, was just being able to find language, because I would get frustrated because I just feel so much and I didn't know how to tell people, like, I don't know why I'm feeling this way. Don't try to rationalize how I'm feeling or what I'm thinking. So, but getting language helped me. And then it helped me help children and other people. So like, first of all, would be having to notice something. Like, what am I noticing? Like, what is the thing that's bothering me? Or what am I observing? What's my experience? And that would be the first thing I'd have to figure out, because a lot of times I was feeling, or, I had a lot of emotion run through my, I didn't know what I was experiencing. So it was hard to say, well, I'm noticing that you are frustrated with me by the way you're talking. And I'm thinking that maybe the way you're talking to me is probably not how you're feeling, but I'm feeling confused. So I'm feeling like I want to be treated better, but the way you're talking to me makes me feel bad. And what I want is for you to tell me if you're upset with me, just tell me so I know, or correct me if I'm wrong. Like, that's really clear language, but that took me a long time to be able to do.
Right. And those are all your highly sensitive traits, that you were noticing things that other people weren't. You were able to use that reflection, that observation, to own your experience and then to share back what you were observing and asking for a reality check, which is so healthy, because what happens is we often see something in somebody else and we make up a story in our head. We don't do a reality check. And then out of our history or our woundedness, we act from that. And then we miss this beautiful opportunity to get corrective information and to form really meaningful communication in the moment.
Right. Because then I make up a story. I have great ability to see into things, and I'm creating stories before they're even real. So it's taken me a while to slow down and use those observations to explain my experience. Because if someone said you're not being rational, then I'm thinking, well, I don't know what you mean, because this is my experience. How could it not be rational? Like, it's my experience. So the part that for me was I had to show them something I could identify and say, this is what I'm noticing. So for me, it was really helpful to get more language and something simple and practical. And I think that's a lot of, while being a principal wasn't my ultimate goal, was really useful because I had to be in very highly sensitive situations with a lot of people involved, sometimes lawyers and all sorts of people in a room. And I had to still be able to compose myself and lead them through what I observed. And when I noticed parents who often, if most kids that have problems, they either have some sort of thing that's labeled as a disability, or they're, like you described, they're highly sensitive. So what their behavior doesn't match up with what they're saying. So my job was to just bring everyone back into a place of understanding. So like it was a useful time for me, and I get to take those skills with me, even though it's not someplace I want to thrive.
Right, right. What I'd love to do now is to just a little bit of a shift. And can you share what happened after you wrote that first book? Just kind of in a nutshell, where has your career taken you? What are you doing? Because I think this is also a really important part of the story of how you used, what were perceived weaknesses to really thrive and create a world and a lifestyle that really honors who you are.
Yeah, no, thank you for pointing that out and asking. As a result of that, showing up and sharing the fact that I didn't know what I was going to do 30 days before showing up, writing a book about the art of apprenticeship, about how to find a mentor. What it did was, when I said I wrote a book, I'd say it took me 24 years and 30 days to write a book. It's 24 years to doubt myself and think about it, and the 30 days to actually write it. So when I talk about it, people were just blown away. And so at that event, 3 people came up to me and said, I would really love you to help me write my book. I was wondering how I was going to do it. And your story inspired me, because if you can do it, I know I can. And I said, of course I can. I'm glad to help you. But I wasn't thinking it would be a business. I just thought that I could help. And then they said, well, what do you charge? And I just pulled the number out of my head, just threw it out there. And they're like, okay. I was like, wow, that was amazing. So I became really good at bringing the story out of people, which I had always been good at. But, in school, they want kids to write papers. They don't want them to write a compelling story. It's not what it's about. Not only that, but Pat Flynn, who was the organizer of the event a few months later, or even at that event, had alluded to it, but asked me, would you help me write my book? And not only did I help him write that book, it became a Wall Street Journal bestseller. I went on to help lots of people who became international bestsellers, but mainly help them build their book into their brand, because I could see into them something that they didn't notice. And that skill of paying attention and being aware was really useful. So now, I left working for anyone a few years ago. I traveled. I've lived in Shanghai. I've lived in Portugal part of the year. I live in Puerto Rico. I'm able to go where and whenever I want to go. And it's pretty amazing. And I use the skill of being me. I haven't had to go acquire, which I thought maybe I had to go acquire a bunch of new skills. But the skills I have are the ones that people want the most, which is my empathy, which my ability to see them. The things that were sort of hindrance have become my superpower and useful in a way that anybody who really wants to write a book who doesn't know where to go, they call me. So it's a real blessing.
It's just such a beautiful story from a kid who couldn't read and write and, wanted to write a book, but didn't feel like he had the ability to where you came from. And is your podcast current?
Yes, my podcast is currently, it's called Born to Write. And it's really meant for me to learn and connect with authors and share their stories behind the scenes. Because a lot of people think that they see author and that their journey wasn't hard, or they wrote the book by themselves. So I like to unpack that experience of people. And sometimes it's brand new authors, and sometimes it's authors who've been in New York Times. And it's really great to hear that the journey is different for each person.
Yeah. And I had purchased a podcast course and sat on it for 17 months. And I really felt like I was procrastinating. And I had an idea that I wanted it to be about vulnerability and authenticity. And I remember posting in the group that this course came from and saying, like, I'm just procrastinating. And somebody said, like, maybe it's not time yet. And then as soon as I learned about the trait of being highly sensitive, it's like, bingo, this is what I'm meant to do. This is what I've known about. I just didn't know what it was called. And within a matter of months, I rolled out my podcast and everything became very clear. And now my story is it took 17 months for the podcast baby to germinate because it just wasn't ready. But it's so easy for us to judge why we're not doing something. And I certainly had a lot of fear. I don't have anything to say. Who's going to want to listen? And even today, I still go through this. I'm a one-trick pony. People are going to get tired of hearing me. I don't have anything new to say. Like, those gremlins don't always stop coming up, but the volume that I hear them, it's like, okay, thanks for sharing. And then I figure out what I need to do. That I think there's this idea that success means that we don't have fears, we don't have doubts, we don't have reservations, or once we make that bestseller or whatever it is, then we're going to feel ease. And that's just not how it goes. It's about being willing to bump up against those fears consistently, but they just get not as loud. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Like, I was very surprised at the response to that talk that you saw me at in Podcast Movement, because up until the moment I walked out the door, I still hadn't figured out what I was going to say completely. And I was like, this is ridiculous. How could I be doing something in marketing? What am I thinking? I have this idea. So even into the moment before I hit the slides, I was like, I don't know if this is what I want to say. Obviously, it needed to be said. So many people were impacted by the words that I said, but it wasn't so much that the information, like you said, is what moved them. It was me being who I was. And so that's why I was like, there's probably spelling errors in that slideshow. I don't know. I was the only one I really was struggling. So, if I can go up and speak and struggle, and same thing with the TED Talk. The TED Talk I rewrote the night before and I was freaking out. But it's the talk that has 1.7 million views. And it wasn't because it was great. It's because it was me showing up the way I needed to for people to hear the message, not because the words were perfect. And when people judge the words, which I used to feel judged by, I realized that they're not listening to me. They're making their own judgment. It has nothing to do with me, because the words isn't what I'm trying to share. It's the experience, the message. Mm-hmm. So, but I still get those. Every time I'm doing something that I think is meaningful, I have those feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And we just learn to go, okay, isn't that interesting? Oh, I'm doing something really big, but I'm getting more and more negative, fearful thoughts coming up. That's because I'm risking and I'm challenging myself. Thanks for sharing. Note, hint of sarcasm.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is great. Azul, tell people where they can find you. Tell them what projects you're working on, where you'd like some support.
Yeah, so you can find me on authorswholead.com. That's the Authors Who Lead is the place where I spend most of my time. Of course, if they're interested to hear about authors, they could always go to the Born to Write podcast. But I love when people connect with me on social, send me a message, and they can find me Azul Terrones on most social platforms. And yeah, I just really appreciate when people tell me their stories of how they're struggling with writing or why they want to write a book. And it just inspires me, because I want them to know that everyone is meant to write a book, everyone. And people that disagree with me, I respectfully decline, and I say no, because I've seen the difference it makes in my life and the people that really want to share something. So I encourage everyone to take the leap and write something if they have it in their heart.
Yeah, and the people that are meant to work with us or be drawn to us will, and we are going to get people that disagree or don't like what we're doing or are critical, or like, those just aren't our people. And it just takes time to know, like, okay, thanks for sharing, and you're not my people.
Yeah. The more you share, the more you attract your people. The more you worry, the more you attract people who aren't your people. And then you're like, see, I told you. So it's sort of like the opposite. You have to show up as yourself to attract the people that you want to be in your life. Because I definitely intentionally repel the people that aren't my people. But it took me a while to write down, who do I not want to work with or be in their circles? And once I got clear, it's like they no longer come around. They see me and go, oh, nope, not this person. He likes to be sensitive and likes to express himself, and that's not me. I want this person. And I'm like, good, because now it's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else that you want to share before we sign off?
Well, I just appreciate you taking time to reach out to me and to create a conversation for people that maybe feel like, I've had one of my clients say they don't like to use the C word. And I'm like, oh, what word? They're like, crazy, because people think I'm crazy because I have all these things that I can't explain of how I am. And I think you provide the opportunity for people not to feel those things or not feel so alone. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, you're welcome. I rarely go up to speakers. I'm one of these people that kind of want to be invisible. Again, with that narrative of like, I don't have anything to share. And you finished, and I just felt like I feel so compelled to go up and connect with you. And then I came home and reached out to you. So thank you for your receptiveness. And this just feels really like serendipitous. I'm just been really pleased with the things that you've shared during this interview. So I'm so excited for people to get to hear you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
All right. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Hey there. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed talking to Azul, and I just think his authenticity is just delightful for being so successful. He just really is such a modest person and is really about just showing up and being who he is, which I think is something that we all really want. Azul talks about the importance of building relationships, connecting, showing up and being who we are. If these are things that you're wanting more of, if you're struggling with boundaries, perfectionism, authenticity, embracing who you are, some of the things that we talk about in this episode. I teach an online course for highly sensitive people, and we cover 8 modules, and you get to be around other HSPs. They've been incredibly powerful. So if you're interested, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. You can click on the HSP group page. There's information about when they launch, and I have a waiting list if you're interested in signing up to be on the list for when they come out again. I run them 4 times a year. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Thank you so much to each and every one of you for being here, for listening, for supporting the podcast. I really appreciate you. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.